Hi. So, the JP FanFest has come, gone, and most importantly, delivered upon us insights, such as lion mommies. A frankly abusive amount of content, if we're being honest. Seriously, I expect them to play all this shit. Solution 9.
Don't like the name of that, by the way.
And, most importantly, the Pictomancer job trailer reveal. Haha, that's what you clicked on this video for, didn't you? But, Pictomancer. Very odd choice, very risky by Mr. Yoshida the P. It's not really a job that screams, I am a legacy job from the outside perspective, or even from the inside perspective, really. It's only been in one game before, but I think that's probably the reason why they picked it. It kind of has always had that kind of snazz and pizzazz to it, just as a concept, you know, the magical artist concept. I mean, even in Bravely Default 2, just look at its gear, like the artifact armor that it wears. Artifact armor, is that right? Signature gear. The signature gear that it wears looks amazing. Its gameplay, really amazing, and apparently really broken from what I've read. And it's not even, you know, limited to games. In manga and comics and stuff like that, it's, you know, the magic artist trope is incredibly popular. I mean, look at Witch Hat Atelier. The entire, like, theme of that manga is pretty much the trope of magical artists. And it lends itself very well to that. And as something of an artiste myself, I do think it's pretty cool that they added that in a very direct way in Final Fantasy XIV. Very cool, you know, I think very built for me, specifically for me, haha. But you didn't come here to hear me wax about the inspirations of Pictomancer and the magical artist trope. Or maybe you did, who knows, I'll probably make a video about it sometime. But for right now, here in this moment, allow me to present a positively passionate pick-apart of the Pictomancer job trailer breakdown. I'm funny. And right out of the gate, we can see that this first spell, the fire spell, the red primary color spell, gives us a buff. But interestingly, we won't be keeping that buff for very long, as in for the next skill, this purple spell pretty much removes or converts whatever buff we received from the fire spell previously. Now, even if we exclude the fact or try to treat this as like its own separate clip, the fact that it's removing the buff immediately makes me think of Red Mage and the dual cast system. Now, if you don't know how dual cast works, essentially when you're playing Red Mage, any spell that you cast will give you a buff called dual cast. You can then spin or convert that buff, which is more like a resource, into insta-casting any spell, or your food, or your sprint, because, you know, they still haven't fixed that interaction. But of course, there is an alternative theory, and I want to explore this theory a bit more as the video continues, that perhaps the primary colors will put us in like specific buffed state, you know, kind of like Summoner's trances. Like, we'll have the primary color of red, but if we use a different spell that isn't the red spell, we'll immediately lose that state. That could be what's happening with this purple spell, is that we've entered the red state, right? We've entered the red state, and now we're casting a different spell, but, you know, that spell isn't the red state, so we completely lose that buff, right? And of course, this isn't the only hint that the trailer gives us of this mechanic, as we'll see with our next sneaky little spell. And here we have the yellow spell, our sneaky little yellow spell. And why is it so sneaky, you might ask? Well, you're one zoom in away from finding out, because hidden behind this beautiful animation, we can see a buff removal / conversion indicator and a buff or resource indicator. At first I thought maybe this is some sort of proc system, like maybe your spells have a chance to proc, like Dancer, you know? But I think right now I really disagree with this. I think it could be a proc-based system, but I'm starting to lean more towards my previous statement of your primary colors giving you a state. I think it's less of a removal of the state and more of a conversion of the state. Like here we can clearly see that you're losing some sort of buff and you're obtaining a buff when you cast yellow. But when we cast purple previously, we just straight up lost a buff. There was no gaining a buff, right? Now, I do think that there is still some credence to it being a resource kind of system where you're spinning them to empower spells, but I do think this color state makes more sense to me, because there was no buff from the purple spell, obviously, but we get a buff again from the yellow spell. I think it's more so that the purple spell was meant to show us that if we cast spells that aren't like primary colors, in some circumstances, they will completely remove that buff or that buffed state. Now, I do think later on, there is going to be a spell in this video that shows us that it's not just primary colors, but I think I have an explanation for why that is. Anyway, let's get on to this spell right here. And we have this spell, or channel, whatever this is. This thing caused me so much trouble because I spent like 3 or 4 or 5 days trying to figure out what it could possibly be. You know, trying to, I don't know, draw some sort of, you know, narrative conclusion between this and the other skills that were, or the other spells that were cast throughout the video. But it was kind of eluding me, you know? Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that I can just infer from this, is that, like, it could be a buff because it acts in a similar way to Dancer's Bard, or Dancer's Bard, Dancer's Dances, or Bard's Songs, right? But the issue with that statement is that I have no way of confirming or denying that, because in-game, you don't see Bard or Dancer receive, like, the buff marker or the buff indicator that, you know, you would see with other generic buffs like Embolden, or, you know, something else. I'm trying to think of a buff. Arcane Circle, yeah, that. I mean, the worst part really is, even if it did have a buff indicator, we wouldn't be able to tell if this was like an AoE buff or anything like that. Because even with those auras, like Bard or Dancers, you know, auras, they're buffs, we can't really see them on other party members. You know, like even Devilment, you can't see on other party members. That being said, they do state though that Pictomancer will have some sort of buff or some sort of party utility spell. Now, I think even if we just ignore the buff aspect, we can pull a lot of stuff out of this this clip of this spell or channel, right? Because if you look right here, if you zoom in, and if we, you know, cross-reference this with the trailer, we can see that when Crowl is painting, you know, the big picture of the Spriggan, the initial color she uses is white. And we can see when this channel is being started up, the initial color used is white. So I think that white will serve as sort of a canvas color, right? Like this will be the base color that you add other colors to, you know, paint the picture, paint the scene or landscape, or weapon, because, you know, they can paint weapons too, that will give you a certain type of effect. Now, to go more into this, we see after, you know, the white color is established as, you know, the canvas color, they begin to paint like the mountain range area, you know, like the full painting, and then when they add color to it, it's blue. It's a primary color. It's a blue primary color, right? Now, I wouldn't think that blue is a color as a primary color. It would be locked specifically to this spell only. So the more I looked at this, the more I sort of noticed that you can actually see multiple different colors in this one painting. You can see the yellows, you can see the reds, you can even see like purples and teals here. But I think the most significant part of this is that you can see the reds and you can see the yellows. You see the previous primary colors that were cast, you know, red and yellow. But when they went into this canvas phase, or this painting phase, the activating color was blue, right? It was also a primary color. So essentially this leads me to think that my previous assumption that it's not going to be exactly like a dual cast system is a much more strong assertion, right? Because like I said before, we see in the previous cutscene, or we see during this cast, that they're using blue as a primary or an activating color. So in my opinion, it's only natural that blue wouldn't just be locked to being this primary and activating color, and more like when you go into this canvassing mode, or this canvassing phase, or however you want to describe it, you'll be using white as a base, and then either red, yellow, and blue as your options to paint these landscapes. And additionally, this might be a really hard speculation or copium or whatever, but you know, we're here to speculate. That's what we do. We're doing it for the content, baby, okay? I think that the colors that you go into will decide what painting you end up, or landscape you end up painting, with your primary color. The reason why I can sort of assume this is that, so as an example, if you end up going into, say red, then yellow into blue, wait, we see that in the trailer. If you end up going into, say, yellow, then red, then blue, I think that that will be different than what we saw here, which was red into yellow into blue, right? Now this I'm not exactly sure of, because, you know, it could just be each sequence will flow into each other to the landscape. We've only really seen one landscape, and that's the, you know, the Starry Night Sky landscape, as it were. And they do say that, you know, we're supposed to be able to paint weapons and monsters as well. So I would assume that this sort of canvas mechanic isn't tied completely to just landscapes, but I'm just assuming that right now based off of, what the information that we have in the trailer. Whew, okay, enough with that one, enough with the whole canvas thing. I think I've summed up my thoughts about it pretty well. Now let's go into this next spell, which will be our last attacking spell, shockingly enough. So the ice spell, Mr. Icy spell. This is a mixed color again, like the purple spell that we saw previously. I think what's interesting here is there's a lot that I could draw from it, like the way that the landscape looked previously. I think it might obviously influence this spell, but just right now I'll say clearly that this spell gives you a buff, unlike the purple spell, which was a previously mixed spell. If I had to infer or guess anything, it would probably be that when you paint a landscape, it will most likely give you some sort of, enhanced state or something like that, where you can freely cast your mixed colors without consuming your previous primary colors, or something to that effect, I would think. But in general, the main takeaway from this is that unlike the previous mixed color spell, purple, this gives you a buff, and we don't see that it's taking away a buff in order to either be used or to, be cast, as it were, which is, again, interesting. Now, another obvious theory would be that this buff is tied specifically to, again, the type of canvas that you're painting. Because you previously just used, or the spell that we saw before previously used blue as a primary color, if we go by that logic and that theory, it would just infer that you get access to all of the mixed colors or off colors that are associated with the blue color. And even then again, we see with the buff that you do gain a similar buff. So if I go by my logic of a sort of painting stance kind of system, it would just infer that you also get the stances from these mixed paints, which we don't really know how that will tie into the gameplay or whatever, but that's just what I would infer. So essentially the way it would work would be you cast basically purple, and if you used red as your primary color going into your canvas, it would basically allow you to gain purple as a state color, right? Similar to how I said before, it would be red, yellow, and blue are primary states, kind of like trances, right? And this would make sense because even though we see them use blue as a primary color for the canvas, we don't really see them cast a spell after that. We simply see that, they gain a buff. They don't exactly lose a buff like when they were going from red to yellow. Or I guess it would be more like red to purple. It's also, icy, and, the vista painted was like an icy mountain. So, that might factor into it, I mean, obviously, kind of. I think so, anyway. And now we have Frumkin Moogle! But yeah, it's a Moogle, it's a Moogle, there's not really much to say here because there's not really a lot to go on, really. I mean, for the most part, it seems like it's just a gauge spender is what my assumption would be. It is an ability, though, which leads into my next point, or leads into the point that I was planning on making about Pictomancer. And that's that I think Pictomancer will probably not have a whole lot of mobility. I think it'll be somewhere between Red Mage and Black Mage, less than Red Mage, but more than Black Mage, with all the insta-cast skills. Well, I really shouldn't say Black Mage, because the shit you see Black Mages do in Raid is kind of crazy, okay? Yeah, but for the most part, I don't think we'll have as much, it'll have as much mobility as, say, Red Mage or Summoner. That's just what my general feeling would be, because, they say that, it takes a while to make these landscapes, so... And they have the instant cast spells. I don't think the instant cast spells will be something that is more naturally happening phase throughout their kit. It will mostly just be OGCDs. Would be my opinion, just based off of how the Moogle works, or gauge spender, Alright, well, now having gone through all the spells, I feel pretty confident in the outline. I have a Pictomancer in my mind, I formed a Troupe of it, if one would. Because we see that yellow both grants and takes buffs, whereas red and purple only grant or take buffs, respectively, I'm left to just logically assume each primary color will grant some sort of buff state that can be used to cast colors associated with one or two primary colors. So, for instance, if you cast red or blue, you can then cast purple, because that's how color mixing works, But then on the same point, I feel like these primary color states will be transferred if you use a different primary color. So if you use red, you'll lose the red state, and then you'll get the, you know, whatever primary color you went into afterwards. I think the landscape spell is still a pretty big unknown, but I'm very confident that it has some sort of color picking where the white canvas color will be combined with a primary color to create your artistic masterpiece. I say this because we can see blue appears to be the primary color used to paint the starry landscape. It's also the only primary color not used as a spell proper, and the spell cast after it is teal or turquoise, whatever, which is obviously made using blue and green, and also gives you a buff. Now, how the weapons and monsters will play into the overall gameplay, I've got no idea. But if we look at the way the MOOGLE works, and we can assume the MOOGLE is, you know, supposed to be one of our monster casts, you know, MOOGLEs are very terrifying indeed. I feel they'll be our instant cast spells and abilities used to keep us moving during combat. At least for monsters. Maybe weapons will be some form of buff, perhaps. Either way, I feel movement will be somewhere between Black Mage and Red Mage due to these instant cast spells and the relative emphasis on hard casting spells and whatever channel the canvas is. This is just pure speculation though, so if I'm wrong, please mock and ridicule me, but do it kindly because I'm sensitive. And yeah, that's more or less the end of the video. I'm really sorry this took so long to come out. I'm pretty much probably gonna end up releasing this like right before PAX happens. I got really sick for like 2 months. It was really bad, delayed a lot of work, but I hope you enjoyed the video. Once again, I'm looking forward to Pictomancer. It seems really fun. It seems very cool. And looking forward to, you know, Hrothgar, female Hrothgar, and the benchmark. Mostly, I'm really looking forward to the graphical update. And 2 die channels. 2 die channels is the best thing they could have ever thought of. Literally the best invention they've ever like created or concocted in this game, okay? It's going to change the glamour game forever. You're not going to be wearing the same things anymore, okay? The meta is shifting permanently from now on forever, all right? Oh yeah, also, thanks for all the positive comments on the last video. They really motivated me to try and get this video out as quickly as possible, but, you know, I got sick. But anyway, yeah, I really appreciate all comments and, you know, all the likes and stuff and, you know, helping with the algorithm. And yeah, thank you very much. And I really do hope that you enjoyed the video. Bye-bye.
Oh yes, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you very much. Goodbye.